I think applying to jobs is a waste of time. I think spending a lot of time, even worse, on applications, on cover letters, I think even more so or is a waste of time. I think cover letters are basically a waste of time unless they're required. The better focus, and we can delve into it more together, is to have a strategic networking plan.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Well, we are going to have a great show today. We're going to get to, you guys talk about all the things you have to do. We say, point this out, point that out, do some things as far as learning, getting your training and your skills. But now we're going to get to talk a little bit about some career development, and more specifically, we're going to get into how to navigate into, if you're looking for an open position or promotion, or looking at jobs out there on the market. How do you get through some of these algorithms that are out there, or whatever? What the do's and don'ts are. So we got a fellow by the name of Jason Litman that's on. He's a recruiter, and he and I had a conversation, had a mutual friend that was looking for something, and we talked through some things. And I said, Jason, would you be interested in talking to us a little bit? So we've got Jason on the line now. So Jason, welcome to our show, my friend. It's good to see you for the first time face to face. We've been talking by phone and email. So
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Lalo. It's great to be with you both.
Well, thank you, Jason. Well, thanks for joining. The really neat thing is that because we have Jason is going to talk about the recruiting part, yet he's not in the trade world, correct? I mean, it's just recruiting, and we get to see that perspective without having to, how they say that people who take the broker exam and are already in trade fail more than those that are not in trade. I think looking at recruiting and coming into and trying to find a job or strategizing for your next career move, taking out that factor of trade compliance might help you get into that next job a lot better, because you're approaching it and not being too strategic. My wife says I try to do that game Wordle. I'm too strategic. I try to trick it. She says, just do it.
Right.
I haven't even tried that thing yet, didn't it? It's
Anyway. But anyway, so Jason, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's great. As I said, it's great to be with you both. It's you have a great show. I've had a chance to watch it, and as Andy mentioned, I had a chance to chat with him a little bit when he asked me if I would join you both. I said I would be thrilled to.
Excellent. All right. So, Jason, just in general, as we're talking about it, if I'm looking for a job, I'm going to be like, okay, I got to write my resume. Oh, should I do a cover letter? Do I need to upload that? Should I be looking and I'm scanning Indeed or LinkedIn Jobs or, all the other things out there, and I find something and it's like, okay, I do this application, but I never hear anything. It's like it goes into a black hole and all that. What do I need to do if I'm interested in finding something, or I want to relocate or whatever, and I'm looking at jobs in the area, whatever the case may be? Why does it seem so difficult in today's world to even try and get somebody to talk to you, let alone get an interview?
Yeah, there's a number of factors from my experience, Andy, I think that feed into that. I think the first thing I'd say is myself personally, I worked before I became a recruiter in industry. I was in operations and supply chain. I worked for a few different Fortune 500 companies. So I've been on the side of candidates. I've been on that side of someone who's in seat, either in some cases looking for a job, or in other cases as someone who currently had a job and may have been interested in a new opportunity and was at least passively looking. So I've been in that seat. So I can really relate to folks that I talk to, that I advise when it comes to a job search. So there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind most initially. I think a lot of companies would probably hate me for saying this, but I'm going to be honest. I think applying to jobs is a waste of time. I think it's a colossal waste of time, actually. You had mentioned earlier that you described it as the black hole, which is a term I use quite often. I say when folks that I talk to, when you go to apply to a job, your application goes into the black hole, never to be seen again. Oftentimes, your best bet is to get potentially, if you're fortunate, you'll get a rejection. If you're unfortunate, you won't even get a rejection. You'll get ghosted, never to hear from anyone ever again. And that's what happens. It happens, unfortunately, so often when you apply. And the most frustrating thing about it is there could be a role that you are absolutely sure that you are a good fit for. You're reading the job description. This is a role not only could I do, I've done. And it's in my back, or it's in my resume. I have references of all this that could show that. Unfortunately, when you go to apply to the job, there's the application tracking system, ATS, the dreaded ATS, I call it, where if you don't have a certain word in your resume or your application, you'll automatically get rejected. Or if you have the wrong word, you may also automatically get rejected. So for all of those reasons, I think applying to jobs is a waste of time. I think spending a lot of time, even worse, on applications, on cover letters, I think even more so or is a waste of time. I think cover letters are basically a waste of time unless they're required. The better focus, and we can delve into it more together, is to have a strategic networking plan. And we can talk about some of my thoughts on what that looks like. But I think you need to have a good strategic networking plan as your source to be able to find a job.
So I was going to ask about that, Jason. I was going to ask about that my kids just graduated from college within the last 5 years, and I'm wearing their school colors here. But anyway, yeah. So when we were going through that process and they were applying, we did the research and we found that I didn't think that was true, but your resume can be like an SEO, like the pages on your website, and they get hits. And if they get the good hits, then you got a better chance of making the first cut or whatever. I didn't think that was true. So that is true then.
It absolutely is true. And by the way, I just want to say there are people, of course, that apply to jobs and get interviews. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just saying spending the preponderance of your time doing that instead of having a strategic networking plan is a mistake and a common misstep that people have. And to your point there, Lalo, it is kind of like an SEO page, and there are certain words that are better to have in your resume than others, depending on the role you're applying for. But it almost is like a game. It feels like we've gotten so far away from finding the best talent for a role. It's like we're trying to, as you said, game the system. So it's really an unfortunate process that's out there.
Well, there are algorithms I know that are out there that in the ATS, and when somebody applies, it starts scouring through the application information and your resume information to find certain things. And then based on whatever they set up as far as the hiring company in the algorithm of what to hit, it will rank people, it will reject them, it groups them, whatever. It used to be, you could put in an application and then the networking comes into play, and it's like, all right, your application may get put on top or one of the ones on top, and somebody will look at it and, okay, fine. Hey, take a look at ABC, or John Smith. Here you go. You put it up. In today's world, I think there's two things about it. One, if you're interested, if you know of a job and you're interested, you find it on there. I mean, you've got to put in an application before your network can even come into play necessarily to say, oh yeah, it's already in here. Here's the application number or whatever it is one thing. On the same token, I will say from a personal standpoint that several jobs that I've had within FedEx, after I left FedEx, every single one of the jobs I've had when I wound up going to New York, Houston, Chicago, and even the Boise, Idaho, and then again here in Memphis when I'm project managing a part of a federal grant. That every one of those. So the last 6 jobs I've had have come from personal contacts. Even though I may have applied and done things, they're like, it's personal contact. It's that network you're talking about. So why don't we move into that? Is like you're saying it's that important. If there's going to be a couple aspects. One, if you're a seasoned employee, and there's a lot of people out there that are, could even be nearing retirement. It could be that they're in the middle of their career, whatever, that's fine. And then there's going to be an aspect of, well, I'm brand new. I'm just out of college or whatever. I don't have a network. Well, you may have more than you think. So the scenario there is like, so take it from there, Jason. What the heck do I need to do on my networking?
So that's a great question, Andy. And I try to focus on, or I advise folks to focus on spheres of influence and the areas that they have. You mentioned, let's say, folks out of college. Well, what do they have? Depending on the size of their school, they have an alumni association. So there's, your university, if you have graduated from college. I like that, and that's both for newer grads as well as seasoned employees. I also focus on geography. So if you're from a certain city, or if you have something in common with someone, sometimes I speak to folks that are from another country that are here graduating with their master's degrees and trying to get a job, and that's a whole nother layer of complexity. I encourage them to focus on people that might be from their hometown or home country, or a place in their home country if they can find that through their networking. Those are good spheres of influence to have. I also would say one factor I'll put into this that a lot of people, it's kind of right under their thumb, but they miss. And it's whether you're a seasoned employee or not, but let's take it either way. If you're someone that you're networking with, and maybe you don't know someone on LinkedIn, and I'd say I'm extroverted, so I like to network. I naturally do that, and I encourage other people to do that. But I would say that when you're networking with someone, you may say, this person doesn't know me. Why would they reply to me? Well, as I said before, if you have something in common with them, that helps. But one of the reasons they might reply to you if you ask them for some guidance or potentially a referral or potentially to talk for 10 or 15 minutes about the company culture is because if they refer you, many organizations have a referral bonus. And I always like to say that people are nice, people are friendly. You might have something in common with them. You're both from Philadelphia or Memphis or Cal Poly University or whatever it may be. That's great. And they may have that in common. That may be a kicker to get them to want to chat with you. But oftentimes companies offer $1,000, $2,000, $2,500 for a referral. If you refer someone and they get an interview and they end up getting a job, 3 months later, you get a bonus for that. And I remember even when I was younger in my career and I was working at Amazon, I can't tell you, in my spare time, I was trying to refer friends into Amazon to try to get $1,000 bonus. So actually, I went the other way to actually look for people. So there are folks that will do that, and you're not, in my view, putting too much of a burden on them to ask for some help.
Another thing that I've seen, Jason, is associations. We talk a lot about in this is ICPA, and then we just talked about GTEC. GTEC is a division or a group, an event put on by a group called the NCBFAA. And just next week, there's going to be like a border conference here locally in El Paso. But if you pay close attention, I have seen where they have a special rate for students. Like for $50, you can attend the conference instead of $800, right? I mean, $50 might be too low, but anyway, they might do something like that. I mean, what do you think about that? Like going in there and just going in cold and saying, okay, I know these guys are trade people and I know I want to be in trade. You're going in there cold. Do you think that'll ruin your chances or?
No, I love the idea of networking both, Lalo, if it's an in-person event, or if it's even a virtual event, but an in-person event. Again, I will mention that I'm a little more extroverted, but I love going to those. In fact, someone I was advising, who's getting their master's degrees, asked me about the career fair that was going to be at it was similar to trade association in a sense. You're at the university and there's going to be companies coming. Absolutely, that's a great opportunity to engage with folks, as well as through some of these trade associations. And to be honest with you, some of the fees are relatively nominal, whether they be $50 or a little bit more than that. I think it's worth it because all you need is one sort of avenue to get your foot in the door. And I'd say also, folks that are looking for a job, you have to remember, you want to find the right job. Whether you are employed or whether you're unemployed looking, you want to find that right job. But all you need is one. All you need is to find the right one. You don't need to find 10 or 15, but by doing networking, by going to the trade shows, by looking at spheres of influence we talked about, it's going to help you get a step ahead of others that are just blindly applying.
All right. Speaking of which, of finding the right job, one of the things that I'm a huge proponent of whenever I mentor people, and I've been several that it's such an honor to talk to some young folks and all that, and so try this, whatever, and give them some guidance. But one of the things I'm a big proponent on that a lot of universities have, and there's some books to it, 48 Days to the Work You Love. I'm looking at it, is written by Dan Miller, and I have no ties to Dan Miller, so sorry about that, but that's a good book to look at. But there are, I'll call them aptitude tests, or things that you can go through, some testing that, like I said, some of the universities have to help. I don't know if it's tied with the alumni associations or not, but I know they're within the groups. You take these tests and you identify the things that you like to do, the things you don't like to do, and what your personality traits seem to be and all that. And with that, they come back. The net result is, here are vocations that you would flourish in naturally. And here's some that we would suggest you stay away from. Or if you get into those, it's going to take more energy for you to withstand that. But here are the ones that you would be, easier for you. So what do you think about that right there in that kind of scenario?
I like that, particularly for folks that are maybe undergrads or maybe sort of a little more junior in their careers. I think folks that are, I recently made, as I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, I made a career pivot myself. So after 15 years in operations, I pivoted to becoming an executive recruiter. So I decided to make a mid-career change. And I can tell you, that was something I kind of, through my own networking, I figured out would be a good fit for me. I'll tell you, had I taken a similar test, Andy, I think it would have shown that this role or similar type of role would have matched me and matched what I want to do. So often I find folks that are kind of mid-career or maybe even the back nine, wherever you might want to say, so to speak, taking some of those tests could be helpful, kind of give you that insight. But making a career pivot can be a little more challenging. So I think folks that are earlier in their career, particularly, that's a great idea.
Well, to that point, I would also say that many of us are still looking to try and figure out what we want to be when we grow up.
Sure.
I'm 62 and I haven't grown up yet. Anyway, okay. Okay, so here's something else. So, taking those aptitude tests and things of that nature is good. I'm going to hit one more question, somewhat I'll call fundamental, and then I want to start talking about, you were talking about the executive recruiter. I want to talk about if you're wanting to step into that role in executive leadership. But what about LinkedIn, having a profile there? It's my personal opinion that in today's world, you better have a good profile. Even if you're just starting out and whatnot, take the time, learn how to do it, or get somebody to hire somebody to do it, so that you got a good background, good picture. What do you need to do, and all that? But it seems like, without exception, in today's world, you apply for a job, somebody's looking at it, you do a business contact with somebody, potential sales, buy, sell, whatever, it doesn't matter. Somebody's going to check you out on LinkedIn, one of the first avenues. What do you think about that?
So important, Andy, to that point. And as I was thinking about networking and spheres of influence, we talked about education or university or hometown or similar industry or department. As I was saying that, I was almost exclusively thinking about LinkedIn as the tool and the way to do that. Certainly, I think what I would say, it's very important to have an up-to-date profile, professional photo. That goes a long way. I can tell you that it's just having some of those things can go the extra mile. I know as a recruiter, when I go to someone's LinkedIn, when I'm recruiting someone or emailing with them, one thing I'm going to pivot to your point, Andy, is check their LinkedIn profile, check them out, and it usually may mirror the resume, but it's something I would always do and always want to check out and always want to see. And on it, I'm not necessarily looking for a lot of bells and whistles personally. Now, some people that are in marketing or advertising, or depending what field they're in, they might have what I always said called bells and whistles. I'm looking just for the meat and potatoes to really understand what they've done in their career, kind of how long they've been in the role, maybe some key points of what they did, and where they went to school. If they went to school, military, I know Andy, you served, whatever background they may have there. I think that's kind of things I would look for in a LinkedIn profile.
Okay. Well, thinking about it is like on my LinkedIn, I guess I need to pull down my cartoon caricature.
No, I think that's fine. I think one thing I would say, and Lalo, I think you maybe hit on this too. It's important, be you. Like that's one of my top advice to folks that are looking is like, be yourself. If the company doesn't like you for who you are, it's not a good culture match. It's not the right thing for you. So if that is cartoons or whatever that may be on your profile, it's something that shows your character, and a company is turned off by that, then maybe they weren't the right fit.
Well, all said and done, I mean, I can break the lens on a camera because I look like the south end of a northbound mule. So it's like, all right, the cartoon looks a little bit better. Okay. All right. So let's talk about executive leadership. And, if you're an executive, you're on your way up, maybe you're at a director level and you're trying to get to that next level of VP and above. That's a different ball game. I mean, it's some of the tactics you're still talking about as far as the networking and expanding your network is so important. But what do you suggest for somebody that's looking to move up into an executive role? And then next after that, we'll talk about a little bit somebody that's in an executive role and may be interested in moving to another company.
Yeah, it's a great question. So first, you'd say maybe it's a bit of a shameless plug, but I work for a great company, Capstone Search Advisors, and based in Cleveland. I live in Philadelphia. I work for them remotely, and they do a great job in executive research and top 150 in Forbes just recently. So growing. So we do a great job with that, and we work with a lot of folks. To your point, that are maybe at that director level looking to get to VP, or at that VP level looking to senior VP, or in that sort of middle manager looking at director, whatever direction that might be. I think that the top thing that we look for, it really depends on the company. A lot of times companies want someone that's already been in the role, they've shown they can do it, and I'm talking one for could be for promotion, but also looking for some externally. In those instances, if that type of company is looking for that and they're not going to move on that, then that may not be the best fit for someone who's, let's say, trying to get to director to become a VP. That's may take them out of the game. I think, though, the important piece, and I love giving sports analogies. So you think of, if you're a football fan, you're an offensive coordinator, right? And you're that hot offensive coordinator trying to get promoted to become head coach. It takes a team that isn't going to be focused on just hiring someone that was already just a head coach, right? So certain organizations, you look at in the NFL or NBA or MLB or hockey, whatever, NHL, whatever sport you may choose, that they maybe traditionally just have hired people that already were in role, so to speak, already were head coaches, and anyone else who was never a head coach is out of our search. So if you're someone who's a director trying to get the VP, let's just say, or VP trying to get a senior VP, then those are organizations that you're just not going to have a fit for. You're going to want to find someone in organizations where they do that. Sometimes it's hard to identify that. And that's actually, not to plug again, why it's good to have those connections with search firms and relationships with people that know that you're maybe in a job, maybe happy. What we call a passive candidate, meaning you're in a job, it's going well, maybe some growth, maybe not, but if for the right opportunity, particularly promotion, you'd be open to talking.
One of the things that I'm hearing from you is that if you're interested now in trying to find and move up to the next level, one of the things you need to do is reach out to some recruitment firms to, make yourself, let them know that you're available, right?
I think having relationships with the right firms is important, and I say that without naming names. Obviously, I'm biased to Capstone.
And I understand that. And for those that are listening, we are going to have Jason's contact information in our show notes. So it's like, okay, fine, but how do I know? I mean, who's out there as far as a recruitment firm? And how do I make that known? I mean, is this on LinkedIn and I'm like, hey, looking for and I'm available, or what do you do?
Sure. Well, so there's a couple things. I mean, first, I would say the first piece of it is across your career, and I will say this for myself as someone who was in industry. I worked as a director of operations, I was in seat, so to speak. I developed relationships across my career with people, and there were a number of folks that, through my experiences, that I probably wouldn't want to keep in touch with. So it's those people that, as you're in your career, that reach out to you, or that you maybe notice on LinkedIn that you reach out to, are they people that are going to take the time to talk to you on the phone, speak to you, know what you want to do, ask you about your career, or are they the type that, well, I don't have any open roles right now, so just call me later? And I will tell you, I've met both. That did not want to take the time out, and I won't name names, but they didn't want to take the time out to talk and speak, and even get to know me, not necessarily for something right now, but maybe for the future. So some of that, Andy, to be honest, it comes from experience and just, I think, actually trying to meet the right people. I'll tell you that the super large firms, and as I said, Forbes just released the top 150. It's the larger they are, maybe more difficult it is to really have a personal relationship with those recruiters and people that are, of course, a business wanting to grow and expand, but also taking the time out to get to know you and what you want to do and where you want to live and what you want to do, what your compensation requirements are. And those are things I know that myself as a recruiter, I try to do. And I would encourage folks that are looking to try to make those relationships with folks. Again, there are lists out there. You can see them. You can then go to LinkedIn and try to find people that work at those firms, try to connect with them. I'll tell you that some of them might be looking to develop a relationship. Others may be just looking to make a buck.
All right. To that point, though, you in developing a profile for myself, if I'm going to say, okay, I want to talk to somebody, you hit on some things right here that sounds to be very important. Geographically, where do I want to live and work? Again, the compensation levels. I don't know. I want to make a boatload of money, but it's like, how do you say this, right? And all that. So, is it a case? Well, should I be looking at some things to say, I need a minimum of a salary of this, and then I want to be able to have bonuses or, things like that. Company car, most people don't do cars anymore, but I mean, it's, with the perks, those kinds of, where am I going to know to build that kind of a profile before I reach out to somebody?
Well, I think the first, it depends a little bit on the recruiter you're talking to, but I always, that's a question. Like there's 4 or 5 questions I always ask, and I get, reached out to quite a bit. And I do really try to take those conversations at least close to 100% of the times. I really try to build my network. And that's me. I'm not going to speak for the people. I will tell you that I would encourage folks listening here, be prepared to answer that question. I mean, where you want to live, how much you want to travel, what you want to do. Is this role like for like that we're talking about? Or if you're just looking and searching and either passively or actively because you're out of work, be prepared to be able to answer that question. Regarding compensation, I will ask the question. I will ask the question much like this. Tell me about what you're looking to make in your next role. I'm a straight shooter. Now, some recruiters might dance around it. I'm not a fan of it. As far as how to answer the question, as a candidate, I always like to talk about, as a baseline, what I currently make. What I currently make or what I've most recently made in my most recent role. I always like to start from that. And then from there, talk about how much more I'd be looking for, or maybe if I'm out of work or really unhappy, I would be able to make this and still be happy. I would say 2 points to that. Don't necessarily sell yourself short in the sense of saying like you want to make $180,000, but you say you only want to make 140, and then you get linked up for a role that pays 140. Don't be surprised if you go for that interview, you get an offer that's going to be 140. So in that part, but also be a little bit careful about how much you puff yourself up, quote unquote. Let's say you're making 125, you're looking for 150, but you say you're looking for 200. Well, you might take yourself out of the running for some roles that are a really good fit for you, and that's also a danger as well.
Okay. All right. So going through that, you're making the connections with a recruiter, going from there, and again, being able to answer those questions. Because I know when recruiters have called and you hem-hawing around, they're going, well, this person doesn't even know what they want to do. I don't want to put them in front of my client, and they'll get in there and, so again, part of the scenario here is, even it's okay to even say, you know what, I need to get back to you on that question. It's like, I don't know what I need to make. Let me make an assessment. I'm making X, but let me do some thought on that one and get back to you on that, because I don't know yet. How much is it going to be worth for me to leave where I'm at to go to something else? Is it only 10,000? Well, that's one thing. Is it, 20, 30, 40,000? That's a bigger deal. But if somebody responded to you that way on that issue, or, what, would I consider, Portland, Oregon? Well, I don't know. That's the Northwest. Let me have a little bit of time on that. Or if I waffle, what's going to impress you and what's not?
Yeah. It's a great question, Andy, and I can tell you, and I'm a straight shooter. I like to say this to folks I talk to, coming from operations and in this world, I like to be straight with folks. I would not like that answer, and I would have an issue with it, particularly for a couple reasons. One, if you and I are talking, it's probably because one of two things. You either reached out to me and wanted to talk, or I'm reaching out to you because I want to talk to you about a role that I'm working on that I probably have told you a little bit about. So at that point, you and I are scheduling some time to talk. So you've had a chance to think about these things, potentially a role that I've shared, or potentially what you're looking to do next in your career. So you should have, in my view, some idea and some authority into like where you are and where you stand. So someone who's doing that, it would come off to me, to be honest with you, as someone who is either indecisive or they're trying to just make the biggest buck possible. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with trying to make the biggest buck possible, but do it in a decisive manner. And this is where you have to kind of play what you've done and versus what's being offered, and is something that you can see yourself doing. But I look for decisiveness. I think it's super important, particularly in the type of roles that I recruit for.
Okay. All right. So that's a key, folks. That's a key takeaway, is that think of it ahead of time, prepare for your discussion with your recruiter so that you know what you want to do. All right. So moving into that role, all right, and this is moving up through there. What about your resume? As you've got to have something, something for you to look at. Is there any do's and don'ts on a resume?
Yeah, sure, certainly. There's probably a number. And I can tell you that I look at resumes all the time myself, creating them, helping people with them, reviewing them. So it's something I do quite extensively. There's a couple things I would say that sort of stand out to me. First, let me just say resumes are looked at really quickly. Like if you're applying to a job or submitting your resume or to a recruiter, it is not something that we're going to spend an hour on or 30 minutes on. 5 to 10 minutes, and 10 minutes is long. I'll be honest with you, and I really mean that. And particularly someone who, like myself, or someone at an organization that's trained on how to read a resume and look for a resume, they're going to read it quickly. So with that being said, depending on where you are in your career, I don't recommend having a 4, 5, 6 page resume. My resume, 15 years front and back. Could it bleed into a third page? Potentially. I think if you start getting into 4, 5, 6 pages, that's getting to be too long. I think if you're getting into long form and writing paragraphs, which I've unfortunately seen where people have like 3, 4 sentences versus bullet points, that's going to be problematic. I can tell you that for me, what I'm looking for, particularly in the roles I'm hiring for, I'm going to want to understand certainly what the role is, but then I'm going to dive right in and understand, what they've done, companies they've worked for, dates they've worked for there. Were there any gaps in that? If I have questions about that and I think they have a good profile, I'm certainly going to ask you about that in an interview and want to understand what the gaps were, what the reasons were. I say that as someone in my career who's been laid off, and I've had that. I had to explain jumps and moves. So I've had to give those answers so I can kind of understand when I'm talking to someone how to answer that or what I'm looking for in a response. I'm looking for their education background or the military background. Those kinds of things are quick hitters, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this resume and then decide, is this someone I want to talk to? If it is, we're going to hone in on some of those key points. And then based on how they interview with me, I'm going to decide, is this someone I want to present to my client? And if that's the case, there's going to be 5 or 6 bullet points out of this resume, or whether they made it 1 page, 2 pages, or 4 or 5 pages, that I'm going to summarize. So all the stuff that you wrote, I'm going to probably summarize as 6 or 7 key bullet points. And the easier I can get to that and understand that and boil it down, the quicker I can get that to a client, and the more successful a candidate would be.
What about being graphical on the my kids are apparently they accredit their jobs because they made a graph. They're both computer engineers, so they both made a graph, 2 graphs, one for their personal, one their professional. The professional one said, I know Java, I know Python, React, and all all the languages that they knew, and they graphically said on a bar on a 1 to 5 how skilled they are. And apparently that accredited as to how quickly somebody called them back, because they quickly saw their skills. And then on the personal side, like they did another graphic. I thought that was funny, but like my son put that, whatever. He was a Eagle Scout. He likes hiking. He likes, he likes cycling. He's a triathlete, etc. And apparently that helped as well. He put a bunch of icons of that, and like, does the personal stuff help? And do these graphical things help? Are you going to get someone old school and say, what the heck is this? I just want to know what they do,
It's a good question, Lalo. A couple things. I think it depends on the industry you're in. So I think you mentioned that your son, I believe you said.
My son and daughter both.
Son and daughter are computer engineers. So right. I've helped people that are computer engineers get jobs and have those conversations. That might be a little bit more common in that industry. And if that were the case, then I think it's fine. I also would say that be yourself. We talked about that earlier. So if they want to mention some things about them personally, that's good. Depending on how much experience they have, if they're new out of school, I think focusing on personal, like you mentioned, Eagle Scout and that kind of stuff, it may show some leadership. Those are good things to show. I always say for engineers or people that are computer scientists that are technical, is to try to show actually a little bit more of that leadership and try to show that you're more than just Java or just more than just certain programs you know how to do, because every person is showing those programs. What can you do to differentiate yourself? So I think that what you shared may have differentiated them and may have shown some of their own leadership or their own style, so to speak.
Well, and to that point, I think, Lalo, I think they came up with a very good thing, is that showing the proficiency. I know that there's folks that as they're looking for some IT experience, if you will, of people, and in that very thing. I mean, I've literally been talking to several CIOs of recent on a project, and one's looking for, let's say Python, the other one's looking for some older C++ or whatever. And it's like that proficiency level highlighting it may be the very thing that gets them right through the door. So that's a good to your kids there.
Yeah, I think it's a good tidbit that they did. I would counter that also with some of the folks that may be watching the show. Again, there might be some computer engineers that are watching and are recent out of school, but some of the people that are more in the trade, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, might be a little careful about some of the graphs and focusing a little too much on the personal. It just depends on the organization. It depends on the type of roles. Some of those things you want to be mindful of.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me shift gears on you. Now let's talk about executives that are in the current executive leadership roles. I mean, moving from a VP to a senior VP or to COO or CEO or CFO or the C-suite and all that, all those things. That kind of recruitment is going to be interesting. I'm going to get. It'll be interesting in your comments on that, but also from a resume perspective, would you suggest that somebody change their resume from at that executive level from a chronological to more of a skills and proficiency and experience capabilities or whatever?
So it's a great question, Andy. I've seen both. In fact, I talked to a COO of a $1 billion company recently that recently left the firm, took some time off, looking for a new opportunity. I talked to another person who was a COO of a mid-sized bank in the Philadelphia area recently and reviewed their resumes. And one of the gentlemen that I spoke to had like an adjoining document where they talked about like skills and accomplishments, which I liked. I would probably like to have seen that just in one document personally, where the first page might be skills and accomplishments. I still like chronological. I still like that to me, that resume, most recent to what you've done. I say at least go back 10 years. I like to see more than 10 personally, but I know that's the old adage, only 10. I'd like to see more than that. You don't have to tell me what you did in middle school if you worked at a pizza shop, or high school, like what I did when I was 15 or 16. You don't have to necessarily tell me that, but I like to see at least 10, if not a little bit more than that. And plus your education or military service, whatever else you might have. I like seeing that too. So I still like the chronological piece. And I can tell you that it's not, particularly if you're at that level, it's not a bad idea to engage someone that does professional resume writing. I think it's good to do and fine to do. My only counter to that would be, I was talking to someone who paid someone to do the resume, and like they had this huge gap in the resume. This person was looking to be like a senior director, not quite executive. There's a huge gap in the resume, and they were told to kind of like put something about it in the bottom of the resume. And I was like, what's this gap? Can you tell me about that a little bit more? Oh, someone told me to put it this part of my resume so you wouldn't see it. I'm like, well, I can see it. It's pretty obvious. It just looks like you're not being honest necessarily. So yeah, I like the chronological. To me, it tells a story. I think that's important.
Okay. All right. Well, at that executive level now, again, I'm interested in maybe going to different companies and all of that. So the scenario, any suggestions on, again, you've talked about network. We really haven't gotten into the actual network of your contacts yet. And at that level, I would think that would be an extremely important thing. But how do you let people know that you're interested in moving without cutting your own throat at where you're at?
You have to be careful with some of that. There is a way on LinkedIn that you can put that your case. So there's open to work, which we've all probably seen, where it's like you have the picture with the green. There's also a way you can privately put that you're open to work, and I know that because I'm a recruiter, and some folks do that. I can tell you, as an individual, used to be in industry, I would still be a little bit cautious about some of that, and I say that as someone who just there are ways that LinkedIn has algorithms where they would sort of quote unquote block your own company from seeing that. Again, if you're public about it, you're public about it. And believe it or not, I've seen people that work at a company that have done that, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. But anyway, you can privately put that you're open to work, and recruiters can see that. There's a private way of doing it, and you can navigate that. That's one thing. I think this is also why it's important to have those relationships with folks, the right folks that are in industry. My firm, Capstone Search Advisors, we do executive recruiting, including C-suites, every level you can imagine that are exempt leadership. And it's important to have those relationships with folks that, in the event you are looking, in the event that you are open, that there's someone that you can go to and talk to and see what's out there to get a feel for the market. It's important to have those relationships and contacts. And it's also important, I think, in industry to have those contacts of folks and know when they go to another company and keep in touch with them and that kind of stuff. Those things go a long way. And I'll anecdotally share with you that someone I work with very closely, he helped someone get a job a number of years ago, and they stayed in touch. And when this individual was laid off, was looking for a job, he went and reached out to someone that I work with and was able to help him find a next career opportunity. So having those relationships with the right people is super important.
Well, I will say that something that has happened as far as with me recently too, as far as I've had more than one, I've had actually several recruiters that are reaching out to me to consider becoming a board member of corporations. And in that recruitment process is actually even a little bit different. And actually some proposals that I'm, considering. But in that, any advice to, people that may be interested? Yeah, I want to become a board member or whatever, and look at that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and sometimes there could be certain firms that specialize in that type of recruitment. I would say that for individuals doing that, it's super important that if you're going to become a board member, you understand the terms, the company culture, much like I think you would if you're joining any other company yourself, but it's important that it's something that aligns with you, what you want to do, because depending on the level of the organization, there's a good chance you're going to be right there on their company website. You're going to be really tied into to what they do. And some folks, in fact, I was looking. There's a gentleman I recently connected with who actually was a CEO of a rather large company at one point. He's the board of a nonprofit. And those are things that folks like to do their careers. I would say it's not the easiest thing to get on a board, depending on the size, and it sometimes depends on, do you know someone there and what your relationships are, and it's a little bit of a unique process.
Okay, well, it's definitely a different scenario. It's not your traditional interview, I will say that, and it's the other thing you mentioned. Nonprofit. So another scenario in the recruitment process, is it wise for people to talk about their charity work, if you want to call it that? And again, if you're going to get involved in a nonprofit and those scenarios there, how's that do for career development?
Great. It's a great question. And one, I think you have to be careful how you navigate, what you're sharing as far as what your involvement with. For the most part, you mentioned, I know, or Lalo mentioned, kids being an Eagle Scout or something like that. Those are kind of things that I think it's going to be non-offensive. I think talking about the charity work you do is super important. It's something that you can show. Certainly nothing that's political. That's absolutely something you want to do individually or kind of stuff like that. I'd be super careful with that, but as my opinion. Also on social media and that kind of thing. Just it's something it's something that could turn someone off. You want to be yourself. We've talked about that and that sort of thing. Do you necessarily broadcast that in a resume or at the top of your LinkedIn profile? You may not want to. I think if you want to be, I say, probably least controversial as possible. Now, with that being said, I'm not saying don't be civically engaged, or never vote. No, of course not. Of course, you want to do those things and be civically engaged, and it's super important. You just want to be mindful of what you're putting out there and what you're sharing there. I help. It's a nonprofit of an organization that helps feed the homeless and feed the hungry. That's certainly. I'll be honest. That's certainly something I talk about. It's something that I would mention. We do great work. It's something that I mentioned that we do at F4, that we do some great work. Something I have mentioned before in interviews and talked to, and actually tied into the work I've done in operations and logistics, because some of the work I do there ties directly in. So it's even better if the work you do nonprofit has some linkage or tie to what it is that you do in your for-profit business or for-profit work.
Well, I could keep talking and pelt you with more questions, but I think we need to try and wrap this one up. We may create some additional shows, but with that, any, top 3 things you would say, it's based on what we've talked about, what would you say would be the most crucial for us, takeaways? Yeah,
I would say number one, be very hesitant about spending a lot of time applying to jobs. As I mentioned, the black hole, I would be very careful about doing that, and look at other strategies. With that, I would say focus on networking. We talked about some of those key areas, Andy and Lalo, whether that be university, industry, company, hometown, other trade shows we talked about, and professional alliances, those sorts of things. Focus on those spheres of influence. And then finally, I would say it's super important to know what you want to do and be confident in that, where you want to be from a compensation perspective, you want to be geographically, what you want to do next. It's okay to not know. I would say when you're talking to a recruiter, try to be in a situation where you're able to say that, because we talk about Jerry Maguire, help me help you, right? The famous line from that great movie. Well, for a recruiter to help you, they need to understand what you want to go. So fourth, and my bonus would be link up with a great recruiting firm, Capstone Search Advisors. There's a lot of people that will want to talk to you about what you want to do in your career.
Okay. All right. Jason, I think this was a good show. Hopefully folks will like this and listen to it. This is going to be a show that you probably need to download and listen to several times based on what we've talked about. If you have some questions, again, Jason's contact information will be added to this, but all that. And I will say that greatly appreciate our listenership. Please like us, subscribe to us, give us some comments, give us some feedback. But, thank you for being listeners of Simply Trade. But Lalo, anything you want to close us out with?
No, other than thanking Jason for coming on, and I really appreciate it. It was very informative. I really like that. We actually have people that have come to us like at trade shows and say, "Hey, I listened to your show," and the ones they mention a lot are the career development ones. They're like, that was good career advice. Thank you very much. So this really falls into that. So thank you for all that information. So I'm sure some people are going to like this.
Yes. Thank you very much for the time and opportunity, and looking forward to chatting with everyone soon.
With that, folks, we hope you have a great day. And again, thank you for being listeners with us.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.